Most men fail sexually at the exact moment they believe they are doing everything right. They listen, they respect boundaries, they show up emotionally, and still desire never arrives. She feels safe, comfortable, calm, and completely uninterested. I learned this the hard way, not because I lacked confidence or looks, but because I misunderstood how sexual attraction actually works. I believed connection created desire. I believed safety led to intimacy. I was wrong. Desire follows a different psychological path, one that most men are never taught to see, let alone navigate. Here is the uncomfortable truth. The traits that make a woman trust you are often the same traits that prevent her from wanting you. Safety and excitement do not grow from the same soil. And confusing the two quietly destroys attraction before it ever has a chance to form. This isn't about tricks or manipulation or becoming someone you're not. It's about understanding a system that operates whether you acknowledge it or not. If this tension feels familiar, stay with me. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. And if you value calm, honest analysis like this, consider subscribing. I remember the pattern clearly. It repeated itself with different faces, different voices, different settings. The outcome never changed. I would meet a woman, and everything would seem aligned. The conversation flowed without effort. She laughed easily. She shared personal details. There was warmth in her tone and comfort in her presence. From the outside, it looked like progress. From the inside, I felt certainty. I believed connection was forming. I believed attraction would follow. It never did. There was no rejection in the dramatic sense. No sharp no. No confrontation. Instead, there was something quieter and more final. A subtle shift. Her body stayed relaxed, but distant. Her eyes stayed friendly, but neutral. Touch never appeared. Desire never entered the room. I became familiar, safe, and invisible as a sexual man. For a long time, I blamed timing, or chemistry, or bad luck. I told myself she just wasn't ready, or that she needed more emotional depth. I doubled down on listening, on patience, on being understanding. Each time, the same result returned. What I didn't understand then was simple and unforgiving. I was confusing emotional comfort with sexual attraction. Most men do. We are taught that attraction grows from kindness, that respect creates desire, that emotional availability naturally leads to intimacy. These ideas sound reasonable. They feel morally correct. They are also incomplete. Sexual attraction does not operate on the same psychological system as emotional connection. The signals that create trust are not the same signals that create arousal. In many cases, they work against each other. A woman can feel safe with a man and feel nothing sexually. She can feel understood and feel no desire. She can trust him completely and never imagine touching him. This is not cruelty. It is biology and psychology operating as designed. I learned this by watching the pattern from a distance. I noticed something uncomfortable. The men women desired most were not always the men they trusted most. Emotional closeness did not predict sexual interest. Sometimes it predicted the opposite. Women would stay in relationships that felt stable but uninspiring while fantasizing about men who offered intensity, challenge, and uncertainty. Men who were unreliable partners but powerful stimuli. This contradiction confused me until I stopped moralizing it. Female desire does not prioritize virtue. It prioritizes sensation. That does not mean women want chaos or danger. It means desire responds to tension, polarity, and emotional charge. Comfort alone does not generate those conditions. I had built my entire approach around removing friction. I believed that the absence of discomfort would create closeness. Instead, it removed energy from the interaction. There was nothing for desire to move toward. I was predictable, available, eager to please. None of those traits are inherently bad, but on their own they create neutrality, and neutrality is fatal to attraction. Another truth became clear once I allowed myself to see it. Women can separate emotional connection from sexual desire far more easily than men. A man often needs sexual interest to feel emotionally engaged. A woman can feel emotionally connected without feeling sexual pull. This is why men are shocked when they hear, "You're such a great guy," but I don't feel that way. The connection was real. The desire never was. Understanding this split changed how I interpreted my experiences. It explained why doing everything right kept producing nothing. I was building one form of attraction and assuming the other would appear automatically. It doesn't. Sexual attraction must be developed intentionally, not forced, not faked, but acknowledged and expressed. When it is absent, it does not magically emerge through patience. I also realized something more uncomfortable. By avoiding sexual tension, I was avoiding risk. I feared rejection. I feared being seen as inappropriate. I feared crossing an invisible line. That fear leaked into everything I did. Women sense that hesitation immediately. They feel it before it becomes conscious. When a man is unsure of his own sexual intent, when he hides it behind politeness and emotional support, he communicates insecurity. Not through words, but through absence. The absence of direction, the absence of polarity. Sexual attraction requires a man who is comfortable with his own desire, not aggressive, not needy, simply grounded in it. I was not. I wanted her approval before I wanted her body. That inversion destroys the dynamic. Desire cannot be negotiated from below. The more I reflected, the clearer the mistake became. I was waiting for permission to want her, waiting for signs that made wanting her safe, waiting for certainty before expressing interest. Attraction does not grow in certainty, it grows in tension. When everything is clear, desire collapses into comfort. And comfort alone does not move the body. This realization was not liberating at first. It was unsettling. It forced me to question the version of myself I believed was virtuous. It forced me to accept that avoiding sexual expression was not respect. It was avoidance disguised as morality. Respect does not require suppression. Confidence does not require aggression. Sexual interest, when expressed calmly and honestly, is not a violation. It is information, and information allows a woman to respond authentically instead of drifting into polite detachment. I had removed that option from the start. By trying to be harmless, I became non-threatening and non-desirable at the same time. That was the first crack in the illusion that being emotionally safe was enough. It isn't. Not because women are flawed, but because desire answers to a different part of the mind, a part that responds to contrast, to energy, to presence. I wasn't lacking value. I was lacking polarity. And until I understood that distinction, every connection would stall at the same point, right where safety begins and desire ends. Once I accepted that emotional safety and sexual desire were not the same thing, a deeper conflict became impossible to ignore. The two states did not simply differ. They pulled in opposite directions. Safety comes from what is known, from predictability, from reliability, from emotional availability that feels steady and familiar. It lowers the nervous system. It quiets uncertainty. It tells the body there is nothing to prepare for. Excitement does the opposite. Excitement comes from uncertainty, from challenge, from emotional contrast. It raises alertness. It sharpens focus. It introduces the possibility of loss, gain, and movement. It wakes the body up. Women need both to experience desire, but they do not need them at the same moment, in the same way, or from the same behavior. This is where most men collapse the entire dynamic. They believe that increasing safety will eventually turn into excitement, that enough reliability will transform into arousal, that consistency will somehow generate intensity if given enough time. It doesn't. Safety is the foundation, not the trigger. Without it, desire feels dangerous. With only it, desire has nowhere to go. I had been overinvesting in safety, not strategically, but compulsively. Every action was designed to remove tension. Every response was measured to avoid discomfort. I was building a calm, emotional environment and waiting for passion to appear inside it. Passion does not grow in calm environments. It visits them briefly, if at all. The mistake was not choosing safety. The mistake was choosing it exclusively. Attraction requires polarity. Polarity requires contrast. Contrast requires the presence of something that could go wrong, something that is not guaranteed, something that creates emotional charge. Excitement lives there. Once I saw this, I began noticing how different men created different emotional climates. The men women felt safest with were not always the men who excited them. And the men who excited them were often the men who introduced some level of unpredictability. Not chaos, not cruelty, just uncertainty. They did not over-explain themselves. They did not rush to reassure. They did not smooth every edge of the interaction. They allowed silence. They allowed tension. They allowed moments where the outcome was unclear. That uncertainty was not anxiety-inducing. It was stimulating. I realized that I had been trying to control the emotional temperature of every interaction. I wanted it stable, warm, calm. That temperature felt comfortable to me. It felt responsible, but it felt flat to her. Sexual desire does not rise from stability. It rises from movement between states, between closeness and distance, between interest and restraint, between presence and absence. Most men fear this movement because it feels risky. They want guarantees before they invest. They want clarity before they express interest. They want certainty before they create tension. But tension is what creates clarity. When I avoided it, I was not being considerate. I was being cautious. And caution communicates insecurity. A man who is afraid to disrupt comfort is not perceived as strong. He is perceived as dependent on that comfort for his own stability. That dependence removes polarity. It places him in a reactive position. Desire does not move toward what reacts to it. It moves toward what stands independently. This is where the idea of timing became critical. Safety must come first, but it cannot be the final state. Once baseline trust exists, excitement must be introduced deliberately, not through games, not through withdrawal, but through expression that carries risk. Risk does not mean disrespect. It means exposure. It means allowing a woman to feel that something is at stake emotionally, that your interest is real, that your attention is not guaranteed, that your presence has weight. I had been offering unlimited availability with no edge. Unlimited availability without edge does not feel generous. It feels empty. Excitement requires friction, not conflict, but resistance. The sense that two forces are meeting rather than merging immediately. This is why challenge plays such a powerful role in attraction. Challenge creates movement. It invites engagement. It signals that you are not passively waiting to be chosen. Challenge does not mean opposition. It means having a center. When a man has no center, when his behavior adapts entirely to maintain harmony, there is nothing for desire to respond to. Harmony without polarity feels like stillness. Sexuality is not still. Another uncomfortable realization followed. By prioritizing safety above all else, I was unconsciously placing the responsibility for desire on her. I was waiting for her to feel ready, for her to initiate, for her to signal clearly. That abdication of leadership is subtle, but it is felt. Desire responds to direction, not force, but direction. Someone has to move first. Someone has to introduce energy. When no one does, the interaction remains emotionally pleasant and sexually dormant. I had been outsourcing that role out of fear of misreading signals, fear of rejection, fear of being judged. But fear has a cost. It drains presence, it flattens tone, it makes the body cautious and the mind defensive. Women do not respond to fear with arousal. They respond with distance. Understanding the distinction between safety and excitement forced me to reevaluate how I showed up moment to moment. Not just what I said, but how I occupied space, how quickly I responded, how available I made myself, how much tension I allowed to exist without immediately resolving it. I had been resolving everything too fast. Comfort is addictive because it feels good immediately. Excitement feels uncertain at first. It asks you to tolerate discomfort without collapsing into reassurance. That tolerance is a masculine trait, not because it is male exclusive, but because it signals internal stability. The ability to hold tension without panicking, to express desire without clinging to the outcome. When a woman feels that stability, safety remains intact, even as excitement increases. That is the balance. Most men destroy this balance by leaning too far in one direction. They either become unpredictable without trust, which feels unsafe, or they become safe without unpredictability, which feels dead. The skill is knowing when to introduce each element. Safety is established through consistency, honesty, and respect. It tells her she will not be punished for saying no. It tells her she is not being evaluated or pressured. Excitement is created through presence, restraint, and confident expression. It tells her something could happen, that desire exists, that the interaction has a charge. When both are present, attraction can form. When one replaces the other, it collapses. I did not need to become someone else. I needed to stop suppressing one half of the equation. I needed to accept that desire does not reward comfort-seeking behavior. It rewards grounded risk. Once I understood that the problem stopped feeling mysterious, it became mechanical. Not in a manipulative sense, but in a structural one. There were laws operating beneath the surface. I had been ignoring them. Safety is the door. Excitement is the invitation. I had been building doors and never knocking. Once the difference between safety and excitement became clear, another layer revealed itself. One that had nothing to do with individual mistakes and everything to do with conditioning. I didn't arrive at emotional caution on my own. It was taught. From an early age, I absorbed a consistent message. Assertiveness was dangerous. Confidence needed to be softened. Sexual interest, unless carefully concealed, risked being interpreted as disrespect. The safest version of masculinity was the least visible one. So I adapted. I learned to filter myself, to dilute intention, to speak in ways that could not be misread. I learned to prioritize being acceptable over being honest. The goal was not attraction. It was approval. Modern culture rewards this adaptation. Men who suppress desire are praised as respectful. Men who hesitate are described as considerate. Men who avoid polarity are seen as mature. What rarely gets acknowledged is the cost. In suppressing masculine energy, many men do not become safer. They become indistinct. The traits that generate sexual attraction are not erased by moral intention. They are simply buried. Leadership becomes passivity. Confidence becomes accommodation. Sexual presence becomes neutrality. The result is not equality. It is disconnection. Women are not biologically drawn to neutrality. They are drawn to grounded masculine energy, not the exaggerated version, not dominance or aggression, but clarity, direction, presence. When those traits are removed, attraction does not adapt, it disappears. I noticed this pattern repeatedly. Men who tried hardest to avoid offending also avoided expressing desire. They waited. They asked permission before wanting. They hid interest behind friendship. Their intentions were clean. Their results were empty. Meanwhile, men who were comfortable with their own masculinity did not apologize for their presence. They did not seek constant reassurance. They did not confuse restraint with suppression. They were not rude. They were not careless. They were simply unashamed. Shame is the invisible poison in male sexuality. It teaches men that wanting is suspect, that desire must be justified, that attraction needs approval before it can exist. But desire does not operate under social permission structures. It operates under biological ones. When a man feels ashamed of his own sexuality, that shame leaks through posture, tone, and hesitation. It is felt even when nothing explicit is said. Women sense it as uncertainty, as lack of conviction, as absence of polarity. I felt it in myself. I spoke carefully. I moved cautiously. I avoided sustained eye contact when tension rose. My body was signaling apology before my mouth opened. No amount of kindness can compensate for that signal. This is where the distinction between masculinity and toxicity matters. Masculinity is not force. It is groundedness, the ability to occupy space without asking permission, the ability to hold desire without turning it into pressure. Toxic masculinity is insecurity amplified outward. Authentic masculinity is stability held inward. Society often collapses the two. Anything assertive becomes suspicious. Anything sexual becomes threatening. Men respond by shrinking. They become emotionally present and sexually absent. Women do not feel safer because of this. They feel unengaged. Another uncomfortable truth followed. Many men use respect as a shield. Not to protect women, but to protect themselves. It becomes an excuse to avoid risk. I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. I didn't want to cross a line. I didn't want to ruin the connection. These statements sound noble. They are often fear in disguise. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of discovering that desire is not reciprocated. But respect does not require silence. It requires attunement. A man can express desire clearly and calmly without violating boundaries. What makes women uncomfortable is not interest. It is pressure. It is entitlement. It is the sense that a man's stability depends on her response. That dependency is what modern conditioning creates. Men are taught to outsource their confidence to female approval, to wait until they are wanted before they want. This reverses the dynamic. Sexual attraction requires a man who is at ease with his own desire, regardless of outcome. That ease communicates strength, not dominance, self-trust. When desire is hidden, it does not become respectful. It becomes confusing. Women feel the tension, but cannot locate its source. They sense something withheld, something unresolved. Confusion does not create arousal. Clarity does. I began to see how many men had been emotionally neutered by well-intentioned advice. Advice that prioritized safety without acknowledging excitement. Advice that framed masculinity as something to be restrained rather than integrated. The problem was not that men were told to respect women. The problem was that they were never taught how to remain sexually present while doing so. Sexual presence does not mean escalation. It means congruence. When what you feel aligns with how you show up. When a man feels desire and pretends he doesn't, his body betrays him. His voice loses depth. His posture collapses. His attention becomes anxious. He starts seeking reassurance without knowing why. Women feel this incongruence. It reads as weakness, not politeness. I had been living in that incongruence, trying to be the safest possible version of myself while hoping attraction would appear spontaneously. It never did. Reclaiming masculine energy did not require becoming aggressive. It required becoming honest. Honest with myself first. I wanted women. I enjoyed tension. I felt desire. None of that made me dangerous. It made me human. Once I stopped treating those impulses as liabilities, something shifted. My presence became steadier. I spoke less, but with more certainty. I allowed silence without rushing to fill it. I let eye contact linger. Nothing dramatic changed. Everything subtle did. Masculine energy does not announce itself. It is felt. The men who create attraction do not perform masculinity. They inhabit it. They do not seek permission to exist as sexual beings. They respect boundaries without shrinking from desire. That balance is rare because it requires internal authority. Authority that does not come from validation. Authority that remains intact, whether attraction is returned or not. Modern conditioning teaches men to abandon that authority, to trade it for acceptance. The cost is sexual invisibility. Understanding this was not empowering in the way motivational language is empowering. It was sobering. It meant responsibility returned to me. I could no longer blame confusion or chemistry. If I wanted desire, I had to allow myself to be a desiring man. Not performative, not manipulative, grounded. Masculine energy is not something you add. It is something you stop suppressing. Once I saw that the path forward became clearer, not easier but honest. Once I stopped suppressing desire, another truth surfaced. Sexual confidence was not something I could imitate. It was something I either possessed internally or exposed myself lacking. For years, I believed confidence came from outcomes, from positive reactions, from being wanted. I assumed attraction created confidence. In reality, the order was reversed. Sexual confidence is not built by approval. It is revealed in the absence of it. When a man needs validation to feel sexually grounded, his behavior shifts. He watches reactions too closely. He adjusts mid-sentence. He pulls back when interest is unclear. His presence becomes conditional. Women feel that condition immediately. True sexual confidence does not rise or fall based on her response. It exists before interaction and survives rejection without collapse. That stability is what makes it attractive. I saw this difference clearly once I paid attention. Men who carried sexual authority were not performing dominance. They were calm, direct, unhurried. Their interest did not feel like a request. They did not need a woman to want them in order to want her. That distinction matters. When a man seeks approval, he hands control of his internal state to someone else. Desire cannot move towards someone who has surrendered authority over himself. Sexual confidence comes from internal authority. The sense that you are comfortable with your body, your desire, and your ability to handle whatever follows. Approval becomes optional rather than necessary. This does not mean ignoring consent or consequence. It means your self-respect does not depend on her decision. Fear of rejection is the most common sign of sexual insecurity. It hides behind politeness, behind patience, behind endless conversation without direction. Rejection feels threatening only when identity is attached to outcome. I had attached mine. Each interaction felt like a test. Each moment of ambiguity triggered anxiety. I waited for signs. I searched for guarantees. My body responded by shrinking. Women sense fear more clearly than words. Fear in a man does not register as vulnerability. It registers as instability. Instability is not arousing. Sexual confidence requires risk tolerance, not recklessness, but emotional risk. The ability to express interest knowing it may not be returned. The ability to hear no without resentment or self-erasure. When a woman sees that a man can be rejected without breaking her nervous system, relaxes. She feels safe because he is not dependent on her response. That safety supports desire rather than replacing it. The paradox is important. The less you need her approval, the more room attraction has to develop. Neediness suffocates desire. Not because it is morally wrong, but because it collapses polarity. Desire requires two stable centers, not one leaning on the other. Outcome independence is the state where attraction can grow naturally. It means you enjoy her presence without needing it. You express interest without attachment to result. You remain whole whether she reciprocates or not. This state cannot be faked. It is communicated through the body, through relaxed posture, through unhurried speech, through eye contact that does not seek reassurance. I did not achieve this by telling myself affirmations. I achieved it by confronting insecurity directly. I had to accept that rejection was possible, that it said nothing about my worth. That attraction was not something I could negotiate into existence. Once I accepted this, my behavior changed without effort. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped monitoring reactions. I stopped trying to earn desire. I became willing to lose outcomes. That willingness altered the dynamic immediately. Women respond to men who are not trying to win, not because they enjoy being indifferent, but because indifference to outcome signals abundance and self-trust. This is not about pretending you have options. It is about not collapsing when you don't. Sexual confidence is also rooted in comfort with sexuality itself. Many men are ashamed of their desire. They fear being seen as crude or inappropriate. That fear leaks into how they speak, move, and touch. A man uncomfortable with his own sexuality cannot create comfort in another. Comfort comes from congruence, from desire that is owned rather than hidden. This does not mean overt sexual behavior. It means there is no internal conflict about wanting, no apology in the body, no tension around expression. When desire is unashamed, it feels clean. When it is hidden, it feels heavy. Women are not repelled by desire. They are repelled by desperation and confusion. Sexual confidence is also inseparable from competence. Not technique, but attentiveness. The belief that you can handle intimacy with awareness and respect. A man unsure of his ability to navigate physical closeness often avoids it entirely or rushes it clumsily. Both stem from insecurity. Confidence allows patience. It allows reading responses. It allows adjusting without panic. This is why fearlessness around rejection is so powerful. It frees attention. When you are not afraid of losing her interest, you can actually pay attention to her. Fear narrows focus inward. Confidence opens it outward. I noticed another shift once sexual confidence stabilized. My tone changed. I spoke more slowly. My voice settled lower, not intentionally. It simply followed my internal state. The body always communicates first. Sexual confidence is felt before it is understood. A woman does not analyze it consciously. She experiences it as presence, as groundedness, as something solid in the room. This presence is not loud. It does not demand attention. It attracts it. The men who possess it are not always the most attractive physically. They are the most stable internally. Stability does not mean predictability. It means coherence. The ability to hold desire, risk, and uncertainty without needing immediate resolution. I had confused sexual confidence with performance, with bravado, with lines and tactics. In reality, it is the absence of internal friction. Once that friction is removed, expression becomes natural. Desire becomes information rather than pressure. Interaction becomes exploration rather than audition. The shift was subtle, but everything changed. Sexual confidence did not make every woman want me. That was never the goal. It made attraction possible where it had previously died before forming. Some women still said no. The difference was that no longer dismantled me. That is the foundation. Without internal authority, every technique collapses. With it, even silence carries weight. Sexual confidence is not something you do. It is something you stop apologizing for. When sexual confidence stopped depending on outcome, a deeper shift followed. I no longer approached women as solutions to an internal problem. That change altered everything. Before every interaction carried a hidden agenda. I wanted connection to stabilize me. I wanted attraction to confirm my worth. Even when I acted relaxed, there was an unspoken urgency beneath it. Women feel urgency as pressure. Outcome independence removed that pressure, not because I stopped caring, but because I stopped needing. There is a difference. Need creates distortion. Interest does not. When you need a specific woman to want you, you are no longer responding to reality. You are responding to fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of missing out. Fear of inadequacy. That fear leaks through micro-behaviors. Faster speech. Excessive agreement. Over-availability. The willingness to abandon boundaries to preserve access. None of these are attractive. Outcome independence is not indifference. It is self-sufficiency. The knowledge that your life remains intact regardless of her response. That knowledge changes posture. It slows movement. It reduces reactivity. It allows you to listen without strategizing. I noticed that when I stopped needing validation, my interactions became cleaner. I said less. I reacted less. I allowed moments to pass without filling them. Silence stopped feeling dangerous. Women respond to silence differently when it comes from calm rather than uncertainty. Calm silence creates tension. Anxious silence creates discomfort. This distinction is critical. Outcome independence also altered how I interpreted rejection. No longer was it a verdict. It was simply information, a mismatch, a closed door. Closed doors no longer required explanation. That emotional economy freed energy. Instead of investing heavily in one outcome, I remained open, curious, present. Women sense this openness. It feels spacious, non-demanding. There is no emotional debt accumulating beneath the interaction. This is where authenticity emerges, not as a performance, but as absence of need to perform. When a man does not need to impress, he stops shaping himself to expectation. He expresses himself naturally. That expression may not appeal to everyone. It does not have to. Selective attraction is stronger than universal appeal. Outcome independence also protects respect. A man who can walk away without bitterness communicates self-respect. That self-respect is magnetic. I realized how often I had tolerated situations that felt misaligned simply to preserve possibility. That tolerance signaled low value. Value is not declared. It is demonstrated through boundaries. Boundaries without resentment require outcome independence. Without it, boundaries feel like loss. Once independence is internalized, saying no becomes easy. Leaving becomes clean. Interest becomes intentional rather than compulsive. Women respond to this clarity because it mirrors emotional maturity. Another important shift occurred. My attention moved outward. When need disappeared, I became more attentive. Not more intense, more accurate. I noticed reactions I had previously missed. Subtle changes in body orientation, breathing, eye contact, engagement. Neediness blinds perception. Confidence sharpens it. Outcome independence also reshapes sexual tension. Tension requires space. Space collapses when you are chasing resolution. When you are not seeking immediate confirmation, you allow desire to build. You let anticipation breathe. Anticipation is where arousal lives. Many men rush to reduce uncertainty. They seek clarity early. They ask where they stand. They explain intentions too soon. They remove mystery. Mystery is not deception. It is pacing. Outcome independence gives you patience. You are not racing toward outcome. You are present in process. This patience changes how availability is perceived. Availability without need feels generous. Availability with need feels invasive. I became less available without trying. Not strategically, naturally. My life had weight again. When your life is full, attention is selective. Not because you are playing hard to get, but because you are not empty. Women respond to this fullness. It triggers attraction because it signals value without announcement. Outcome independence also neutralizes fear of loss. Loss is only threatening when you believe something essential is at stake. When your sense of self is intact, loss becomes manageable. This does not make you cold. It makes you grounded. Grounded men do not cling. They do not pressure. They do not chase certainty. They invite. Invitation carries risk. But risk without desperation is attractive. The most striking change was internal. My nervous system settled. I was no longer scanning for signs of approval. I was no longer bracing for rejection. That relaxation was felt. Women feel nervous systems before they hear words. A regulated man creates a regulated environment. That regulation supports both safety and excitement. Safety because he is not volatile. Excitement because he is not dependent. This balance is rare because it requires self-development rather than technique. No line creates outcome independence. No behavior can fake it consistently. It must be built. Built through competence, through experience, through willingness to lose outcomes. The men who are most attractive are not those who always succeed. They are those who are not defined by success. Outcome independence is freedom. Freedom from performance. Freedom from outcome obsession. With that freedom, sexual expression becomes honest. Boundaries become clear. Attraction becomes possible. Not guaranteed, possible. That is all desire ever offers. I did not become irresistible. I became real. And real is the prerequisite. Once outcome independence stabilized, I could finally see what had been invisible before. Sexual attraction is communicated long before words are spoken. It begins with the body. I had underestimated physical presence. Not appearance, but how presence is carried, how space is occupied, how movement signals intention. Women respond to masculine energy on a primal level. That energy is not aggression, it is certainty. The body of a man who is comfortable being seen. I noticed that when I felt internally settled, my posture changed. My shoulders relaxed, but stayed open. My movements slowed. I stopped fidgeting. I no longer leaned forward seeking approval. That shift altered how interactions unfolded. Physical presence creates a frame. Within that frame, sexual tension can exist without explanation. Men who lack presence often compensate with words. They talk more, they explain. They ask questions without direction. Their bodies remain hesitant while their mouths stay busy. Presence reverses that ratio. The body leads, words follow. Eye contact became different once fear receded. I stopped using it to check reactions. I used it to communicate interest, not staring, not avoidance. Steady, calm, unrushed, sustained eye contact creates polarity. It signals confidence and intent without intrusion. It invites response rather than demands it. Most men either break eye contact too quickly or hold it aggressively. Both signal insecurity. Comfort with eye contact reflects comfort with oneself. How a man occupies space communicates his relationship with power. Taking appropriate space without apology signals authority. Shrinking signals submission. Overexpansion signals compensation. Authority does not need to announce itself. It is assumed. I became aware of how often I had minimized my physical presence to avoid imposing. I stood farther away. I angled my body outward. I made myself smaller. Those habits communicated distance, even when interest existed. When I allowed myself to be physically present, tension emerged naturally. Standing closer, facing directly, letting proximity exist without immediately resolving it. Proximity creates charge when it is calm, not rushed, not forced. This is where physical escalation becomes relevant. Escalation is not an act. It is a process. I had once believed touch was either inappropriate or overt. There was no gradient in my mind. Either I avoided it entirely or worried about crossing a line. In reality, touch begins socially. Brief, casual, contextual. A light touch on the arm during conversation, a guiding hand while moving through a space. Contact that fits the moment. The key is attentiveness. Each touch is information, not just sent but received. Positive responses are subtle, leaning in, remaining close, returning contact, relaxation rather than stiffening. Negative responses are also clear when you are paying attention. Pulling away, creating space, shortening interaction. Escalation requires respect for response, not assumption. I learned that many men fail not because they escalate too fast, but because they fail to calibrate. They either freeze at the first level or push past signals. Confidence allows patience. Patience allows accuracy. Touch must be deliberate. Hesitant touch feels invasive. Confident touch feels grounding. The difference is internal certainty. When a man is unsure of his right to be present, his touch carries apology. That apology is felt. When a man is calm and grounded, his touch feels contained. That containment creates safety. Safety with intention is the goal. As comfort grows, duration changes. A touch that lingers slightly longer. Contact that does not immediately withdraw. Each step invites response. Escalation only continues when response is positive. This process builds anticipation. Anticipation is more arousing than immediacy. I also learned to distinguish between comfort and sexual interest. Comfort can exist without desire. Touch can be tolerated without attraction. Signs of sexual interest include reciprocity, initiation, increased proximity, playful tension, changes in tone. Without these, escalation is premature. Reading signals requires presence. Presence requires freedom from outcome obsession. When you are not anxious about losing her interest, you can actually observe. Another shift occurred in how I moved. Deliberate movement communicates confidence. Rushed movement communicates anxiety. Stillness communicates authority. Women respond to stillness because it suggests self-control. I stopped filling space with motion. I allowed pauses. I allowed silence. I allowed moments to stretch. Those moments carried weight. Physical presence also includes voice, tone, pace, resonance. Speaking from the chest rather than the throat changes how words land. Slower speech signals certainty. Faster speech signals nervousness. I did not artificially change my voice. I allowed it to settle as my internal state stabilized. Presence is not technique. It is expression of internal coherence. Men often ask how to create attraction. They look for words, phrases, actions. They overlook the body. The body speaks continuously. Before content, before intention. A man who is comfortable in his body gives permission for desire to exist. A man who is uncomfortable restricts it. Physical escalation is not about taking. It is about inviting and observing. The moment escalation becomes about outcome, it collapses. When escalation remains about connection, tension builds naturally. The most important realization was this: touch and presence are not tools. They are translations. They translate internal state into physical reality. If the internal state is anxious, no technique will correct the signal. If the internal state is grounded, even minimal action carries weight. I had been trying to do without being. Once being aligned, doing became intuitive. Sexual attraction does not require constant escalation. It requires accurate escalation. Accuracy comes from attention. Attention comes from calm. This is the embodiment of masculine energy. Not force, not control. Presence held without apology. Once that was in place, attraction no longer felt mysterious. It felt responsive. I was no longer guessing. I was listening. Once physical presence and escalation became clear, I began to understand something deeper. For many women, sexuality does not begin in the body. It begins in the mind. I had been focusing on what was visible: touch, distance, eye contact. Those mattered, but they were not the source. They were responses. Desire was forming earlier in imagination. Women often experience arousal through anticipation rather than immediacy, through what could happen rather than what is happening. Their sexuality responds to narrative suggestion and emotional texture. I had underestimated this entirely. I believed attraction was created through action. In reality, it is often created through implication. Mental engagement is the gateway. Not showing intelligence, not performing cleverness, but engaging her mind in a way that creates respect and curiosity. Women need to respect a man's mind before they desire his body, not because they are judgmental, but because mental stimulation signals depth and competence. It suggests there is more beneath the surface. I learned to stop explaining myself fully. Full explanation removes imagination. It answers questions before they are asked. It closes loops too early. Imagination thrives on partial information. I began revealing myself gradually, not withholding truth, but pacing it, letting curiosity do its work. When a woman has unanswered questions about a man, her mind fills the gaps. That mental activity creates attachment. It creates anticipation. Anticipation is erotic. I also learned the role of suggestion. Sexual innuendo does not need to be explicit. In fact, explicitness often kills tension. Subtlety allows choice. A comment that can be interpreted innocently or suggestively gives her control. She can engage or ignore. That freedom maintains safety while allowing excitement. The key is confidence. Innuendo delivered hesitantly feels awkward. Delivered calmly, it feels intentional. Words operate on multiple levels when used well. The surface meaning remains acceptable. The undertone plants an idea. That idea lingers. I noticed how women responded more strongly to implication than to declaration. When everything was stated plainly, interest flattened. When space existed for interpretation, engagement increased. Imagination needs room. Another realization followed. Predictability kills desire. Not because stability is bad, but because certainty removes anticipation. When a woman feels she's completely figured you out, desire has nowhere to move. Mystery is not deception. It is depth revealed over time. I had once believed transparency meant immediate disclosure. I shared my thoughts, plans, and intentions too quickly. I thought openness created closeness. It created familiarity. Familiarity without polarity feels like friendship. Mystery preserves polarity. I learned to let parts of myself remain unexplored, not hidden, but undisclosed until context invited them. Stories shared selectively. Experiences mentioned without full detail. Curiosity replaced comfort. Women are attracted to complexity, to men who cannot be summarized in a single interaction. Complexity suggests ongoing discovery. This does not mean unpredictability in behavior. It means unpredictability in depth. Emotional intensity also plays a role. Sexual attraction thrives on an emotional contrast. Moments of seriousness followed by lightness. Calm followed by intensity. I had once maintained a single emotional register, always supportive, always calm, always agreeable. That consistency felt safe. It did not feel exciting. Allowing emotional range changed the dynamic. Sometimes I challenged. Sometimes I disagreed. Sometimes I held silence instead of reassurance. Those moments created friction, not conflict. Engagement. Engagement keeps the mind active. An active mind is more receptive to desire. Another mental component became clear. Women often need to imagine future scenarios to feel aroused, not commitment, experience. Descriptions of shared moments, not promises but possibilities, spoken lightly, without pressure. The goal is not to convince, it is to invite imagination. I stopped rushing toward physicality. I allowed mental tension to build. I noticed that when imagination was engaged, physical escalation felt natural rather than abrupt. Anticipation often created more arousal than touch itself. This is why predictability destroys sexual energy. When everything happens quickly, nothing lingers. Lingering is powerful. I also became aware of how communication outside of physical presence mattered. Messages that hinted rather than declared. Timing that allowed space rather than constant availability. When I was always present, there was nothing to miss. When I allowed absence, imagination filled the gap. Absence creates space for desire. This does not mean withdrawal or games. It means having a life that does not revolve around maintaining contact. Contact becomes intentional rather than constant. Women often experience more arousal between interactions than during them. The mind revisits moments, replays tone, reconstructs tension. If interactions are flat, there is nothing to revisit. if interactions contain emotional and mental charge desire compounds. I also learned that challenge engages imagination, not challenge in dominance, but in perspective, offering a different view, questioning assumptions, introducing ideas that provoke thought. Mental challenge signals strength. It suggests you are not seeking agreement. Agreement without challenge feels like accommodation. Accommodation kills desire. Desire responds to polarity of thought as much as polarity of energy. I stopped trying to align immediately. I allowed differences to exist. I held my perspective without needing approval. That stance invited engagement. Imagination also responds to sensory language. Not graphic detail, but evocative description, tone, atmosphere, suggestion of experience. The goal is not arousal through description. It is curiosity through implication. When imagination is engaged, the body follows. I noticed how women began initiating more once mental tension existed. They leaned in, they asked questions, they created opportunities. Desire became mutual rather than pursued. This shift required restraint. Restraint is difficult for men conditioned to equate desire with action. But restraint signals control. Control is attractive. I stopped chasing physical escalation. I let mental connection do the work. Physicality followed naturally. The mistake many men make is trying to bypass imagination. They move directly to action. They skip anticipation. In doing so, they remove what makes desire enjoyable. Sexuality is not a race. It is a process. When imagination is respected, consent feels organic. Comfort remains intact. Excitement grows without force. I had once thought the sexual attraction was created through confidence alone. In reality, it is created through rhythm, the rhythm between presence and absence, between clarity and mystery, between interest and restraint. The mind needs space to want. Once I understood this, interaction stopped feeling heavy. There was no pressure to escalate. Tension existed on its own. Desire no longer needed to be manufactured. It emerged. That is the power of imagination. It does the work when given room. As my understanding deepened, one pattern stood out above all others. Sexual attraction is sustained not by constant presence, but by calibrated absence. I had once believed availability was proof of interest, that showing up consistently demonstrated value. In practice, unlimited availability diluted it. When a man is always accessible, nothing is at stake. There is no tension, no uncertainty, no sense of earning. Desire requires friction, and friction disappears when access is guaranteed. Women do not want to feel like they are consuming something unlimited. They want to feel like they are engaging with something valuable. Value implies selectivity. This is where many men misunderstand availability. They believe reducing availability is manipulation. In reality, it is alignment with a full life. When your time is already occupied by purpose relationships and direction, availability becomes intentional rather than reactive. That intention is felt. I noticed that when I stopped reorganizing my life around one woman, attraction increased. Not because I withdrew interest, but because interest was no longer my central axis. She was no longer the center of gravity. I was. That shift changed everything. Women respond to men who have priorities, not because they enjoy competition, but because priorities signal independence. Independence preserves polarity. When a man has nothing outside of her desire, collapses into obligation. When he has a life that continues with or without her desire, can breathe. This connects directly to social proof. Women are biologically attuned to cues of desirability, not vanity, validation. When other women respond positively to a man, it signals value without him declaring it. This does not require flirting or deception. It requires comfort around women, ease, familiarity. A man who is relaxed around women communicates experience. Experience communicates competence. Competence is attractive. I noticed how different the dynamic felt when I interacted naturally with women in social settings without targeting anyone. Laughter, conversation, presence. Women observe this. They register it unconsciously. Desire often grows through third-party confirmation, not because women lack judgment, but because social environments provide context. I also became aware of emotional intensity as a missing ingredient. My earlier interactions had been safe, but flat. Emotional neutrality feels respectful, but it does not engage. Sexual attraction thrives on emotional contrast. Moments that provoke curiosity, light challenge, mild frustration, excitement, not drama, not volatility, emotional charge. I learned to stop smoothing everything over. When disagreement arose, I did not rush to resolve it. I held my position calmly. I allowed difference to exist. That difference created engagement. Emotional intensity does not mean negativity. It means impact. An interaction that leaves an imprint. Bland interactions are forgotten quickly. Charged interactions linger. I noticed how women remembered moments where tension existed. A look held too long, a comment that challenged, a silence that carried weight. Those moments replayed in memory. Sexual tension is not created by constant pursuit. It is created by oscillation, between presence and distance, between engagement and restraint. When I was fully present, I was fully present. When I stepped away cleanly. No mixed signals, no hovering, no checking in for reassurance. This clarity created uncertainty of outcome without confusion of intent. Women responded strongly to that distinction. Another realization followed. Anticipation is often more arousing than fulfillment. When everything happens immediately, there's nothing to look forward to. I learned to create situations where something could happen without forcing it to happen. Plans that hinted at intimacy. Moments that paused just before escalation. This pause allowed imagination to work. The mistake many men make is pushing to resolution too quickly. They want clarity. They want confirmation. They want certainty. Certainty kills anticipation. When you allow uncertainty to exist without anxiety, desire has room to grow. This requires emotional discipline, the ability to tolerate not knowing, the ability to enjoy tension without rushing to relieve it. That discipline is attractive because it signals control. I also observed how voice and eye contact contributed to emotional intensity. A slower pace, a steady gaze, silence at the right moment. Intensity does not require volume. It requires focus. When attention is undivided, moments become heavier, weightier. I stopped multitasking during interaction. I stopped glancing away. I allowed moments to be singular. Singular moments create memory. Memory fuels desire. Availability also extends to emotional availability. I learned to offer it selectively, not withholding, but pacing. Oversharing early removed mystery. Emotional dumping collapsed polarity. I shared depth gradually when context supported it. This maintained intrigue. Women responded by leaning in emotionally, asking questions, seeking connection. The dynamic became mutual. Another important shift involved how I handled attention from women. I did not chase it. I acknowledged it calmly. I did not overinvest. When interest was present, I allowed it to exist without capitalizing immediately. That restraint signaled confidence. Men often believe they must act the moment opportunity appears. In reality, restraint often increases desire. Restraint communicates that you are not driven by impulse, that you choose rather than react. This does not mean suppressing desire. It means containing it. Contained desire feels powerful. Uncontained desire feels desperate. I noticed how women tested availability subtly. Delayed responses, shifts in engagement, moments of distance. Previously, I reacted by increasing effort. Now I mirrored calmly, not as a tactic, but as alignment. When effort became unbalanced, I adjusted, not to punish, to restore equilibrium. Equilibrium preserves attraction. Sexual tension thrives when neither person collapses into pursuit, nor retreats into disinterest. The dance requires two stable partners. Another aspect of emotional intensity is risk-taking. Appropriate risk. Saying something that might not land. Making a decision without consensus. Leading. Leadership does not require control. It requires direction. Women respond to men who are willing to choose, not because they want to be led blindly, but because decisiveness reduces cognitive load. Decisiveness signals confidence. I stopped asking endless questions about preference. I made suggestions. I set plans. I allowed her to opt in or out. This created clarity. Clarity supports safety. Direction supports excitement. The combination is powerful. Finally, I recognized that sexual attraction is not a static state. It must be maintained, even in ongoing connections. Complacency erodes desire. Predictability dulls it. I continued investing in my own growth, interests, skills, physical health, purpose, not for attraction, but for integrity. Integrity sustains polarity. When a man continues to evolve, he remains interesting. When he stagnates, attraction fades. This is not about fear of loss. It is about commitment to self. Sexual attraction responds to life force, to movement, to growth. The men who remain desirable are those who continue becoming, not performing, becoming. That understanding reframed everything. Attraction was no longer something to chase. It was something to maintain through alignment. Presence, absence, intensity, restraint. When these elements are balanced, desire does not need to be forced. It emerges naturally. What I learned from all of this is uncomfortable, but it matters. The most dangerous moments in life don't arrive when things are falling apart. They arrive when everything looks fine and no one is paying attention to the quiet shifts inside. Comfort can become a trap, not because it is bad, but because it can slowly replace growth if we let it. Many people spend years trying to be accepted instead of becoming solid. They shape themselves to avoid friction, rejection, or judgment. And one day they realize they feel invisible, not just to others, but to themselves. Desire, purpose, and meaning fade, not because life is cruel, but because they stopped choosing tension over safety. The lesson is this: a meaningful life is not built by avoiding discomfort. It is built by learning how to hold it without breaking. Attraction, fulfillment, and self-respect all come from the same place: the willingness to stand fully in who you are, even when the outcome is uncertain. Real confidence isn't loud. It's quiet and steady. It doesn't beg to be chosen. It allows itself to be seen. Whether in relationships, work, or personal growth, the same truth applies. When you stop living to be approved, you start living with integrity. If this perspective resonated with you, take a moment and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read more than you might expect. And if you value calm, honest reflections like this, insights meant to sharpen awareness rather than sell illusions, consider subscribing to the channel. Not out of pressure, out of alignment. I'll see you in the next one.